Context is important. Whether or not a note is harmonic or dissonant depends on the key of the song and the notes that came before. A word's meaning can change drastically depending on the conversation, tone, or even where it's placed in a sentence. But what's this got to do with Donkey Kong? Well, I don't think we'd feel the same way about a lot of levels if we removed them from their context. Congo Jungle introduces us to the Kongs in their home while teaching us the basic gameplay. Monkey Mines covers the broad strokes of the main antagonists, explaining their motivation, history, and even hinting at there being a bit more at play than a simple quest for bananas. From a gameplay perspective, it balances expanding on and reinforcing the basics, while introducing arguably the most fringe gameplay concepts the game has to offer. All that stuff is important when looking at Vine Valley through a more analytical lens. This is part 45 of Overthinking Donkey Kong Country. Just as Congo Jungle is about the Kongs and Monkey Mines is about the Kremlings, Vine Valley is about everyone else. Donkey Kong Island is a big place, filled with many creatures of all shapes and sizes. And this is the first time we're really exposed to the idea that this journey affects more than just Kong and Kremling, and that while justified in their pursuit of their banana hoard, the Kongs maybe need to ask themselves just how far they're willing to go and what they're willing to do in order to take back what's theirs. I know that sounds a bit over the top, but that's what this series is all about. Before we take a look at the gameplay, let's take a look at the overworld map for a moment. First thing that stands out to me, aside from the forest, is how we're kind of getting our first look at the other side of the island. If you look at a map of the island itself, you can see the pines, then a little bit of jungle below and to the right. Taking that into account, we're probably looking at the lower part of the forest, over a lagoon or river, and to the jungle on the right. Despite the forest taking up half the map and half the levels, it's my thinking that the centerpiece, climax, namesake, and thematic heart of Vine Valley is actually that little patch of jungle. I'll get into why later. Aside from all that, we've got a bunch of rope bridges, including this one frankly ridiculous one in the center, another temple, and you can kind of make out Treetop Town in the forest. Alright, let's get into it. Vulture Culture, to me, feels like an expansion of Barrel Cannon Canyon. Maybe not a full-blown sequel, but close enough. The gameplay is largely based around the barrel cannons, but where it deviates from Barrel Cannon Canyon is it places a large emphasis on using the stationary flying neckies as stepping stones through the air, using that previously established mechanic to introduce the other. Treetop Town is much closer to a sequel to Barrel Cannon Canyon than Vulture Culture though. While Vulture Culture takes the core gameplay of Barrel Cannon Canyon and adds the neckies, Treetop Town instead takes that core concept and adds one simple degree of challenge. You're no longer just timing your shots, now you've got to look 2 barrels ahead, making sure the timing of your first shot will line you up for the second barrel's automatic firing. And as the last 2 levels riff on the mechanics established in Barrel Cannon Canyon, Forest Frenzy expands on the core ideas of Ropey Rampage. Instead of just climbing up or down a rope, using them to reach new areas, Forest Frenzy incorporates dodging incoming enemies. Again, riffing on one aspect of gameplay while strengthening another. As far as I can tell, excluding the infinite spawns of the black drums, this level has the most enemies in the game. It's also the first appearance of the Grey Critter, arguably the worst of the bunch, and the most zingers in any one level, which I think is significant, but I'll explain why later. Temple Tempest is themed around the millstones, which now pursue you through the level. This was stop and go station levels of tension for me growing up, but it's manageable. It's the first appearance of Espresso, the 4th of 5 animal buddies and the last playable one to be introduced. I consider it a bit of a soft launch for Espresso because he's pretty out of the way. There's a strong naughty presence throughout Temple Tempest, and like the zingers in Forest Frenzy, I'll explain why I think that's important later. You could call this a sequel to Millstone Mayhem, I guess. Orangutan Gang is for sure the best level in Vine Valley. It's the final jungle level in the game, with an awesome sunset over the treetops, bathing the world in twilight. It's the only appearance of the Vine Paths, which is good evidence of the theory I put forth that this level is the true Vine Valley. It's the first appearance of Monkey Kong, the coolest enemy in the game and one I've sung the praises of in the past and no doubt will again. The gameplay focus is on both the Monkey Kongs and Espresso. Sure, Espresso was in the previous level, but in this one you can't miss him, and much of the actual gameplay seems to showcase his abilities, whether it's walking over the claptraps or gliding down to bonus areas. Speaking of bonus areas, Orangutan Gang is infamous for having more bonus areas than any other level in the trilogy, and they're all pretty shit bonus areas too, aside from one. After Orangutan Gang, Clam City feels a bit anticlimactic. I theorized that this was tacked on late in production, or maybe the order of the levels was switched. Whatever the case, it's the final level before the boss. It's a fairly straightforward water level, with the focus being on dodging the pearls the many Clambos shoot at you. Queen Bee is for sure the most intimidating boss to date, but it's not too difficult. Now let's take a closer look at the story of Vine Valley. After defeating Master Neki, the Kongs follow the Trail of Bananas into a dense pine forest. It's a very different world from the one they're used to, an ecosystem in which the Kongs have no place, but they take it all in stride. Nestled up against the mountainside, Vulture Culture is the home of the Nekis, and they don't take too kindly to Donkey and Diddy trespassing, especially after what they did to Master Neki. They make their way to Treetop Town, which now seems to be the home of the Kremlings. It's clear that it isn't their true home, so it's more likely for the Kremlings working in the mines or traveling down from the mountain. But who lives here first? Various sources say various things, but I think there's a big old clue right there in the name. We'll circle back real soon. The Kongs leave the town, working their way to the edge of the forest. There's a ton of zingers in the area, and they all seem pretty worked up. There's a pretty heavy Kremling presence in this neck of the woods, and that's about all the clues we'll get as to why. Crossing the bridge over the inlet, the Kongs find themselves in the ruins of another ancient Kremling temple. This time, they're aggressively chased out by the Naughties standing guard. Between that and the noticeable presence of the Blue Naughties, it seems that this abandoned ruin is the true home of the Naughties, and it's very possible that it has been for thousands of years. Helped out by Espresso, Donkey and Diddy make it up to a dense jungle canopy, where they cross over treetops and bridges made of vines. Speaking of vines, the name of this world is Vine Valley, but there are no vines in the forest, none in the temple or the treetop town. Definitely none to be found underwater. The only vines in the entire world are found right here in Orangutan Game. Why would the entire world be named after one level, especially when that one level doesn't seem to gel with the overall visual theme of the world? Because this level tells us so much about the Kongs and the island itself, and perfectly encapsulates the theme of the entire world. It is the true Vine Valley. Every level, including the following Clam City, is home to one of the species on the island, and in pursuit of their quarry, the Kongs trespass without a second thought for what impact their presence might have on the inhabitants. And no inhabitants have a bigger bone to pick with the Kongs than the Mankeys. Referred to as Kong reject orangutans in the manual, and expanded upon in game guides and magazines, it seems Mankey Kong wasn't exactly bad, but for some reason or another was ousted from the Kong clan, and is Kong in name only these days. That makes their opposition to DK and Diddy's journey a deeply personal one. I called Mankey Kong the proto-Lanky Kong, and I stand by that. We had 4 of the 5 archetypes set up in DK64, playable over the DKC trilogy, and I feel a playable Mankey Kong would have completed the set and complemented the gameplay styles of the others nicely. Alternatively, he could be like the Wario to Donkey Kong's Mario, kind of like a Bizarro DK. I don't feel good about that, to be honest. I think it was the Mankeys that gave the treetop town to the Kremlings to use. Unlike chimps and apes, orangutans are completely arboreal. They spend their entire lives in trees, so it makes sense that their homes would be built up there. The Kongs make it to the end of this stretch of jungle, possibly with new insight into themselves, their role on the island, and how they're going about their mission. Having seen the pile of bananas on the rock from the jungle treetops, the Kongs jump into the water and begin the long swim towards the island. Whether by accident or design, they found themselves swimming through the home of the Clambos, the titular Clam City, another example of territorial animals reacting aggressively to the Kongs intruding on their home. They make it to the island to find this part of the horde being guarded by a giant queen bee, but there's something different about this fight. Queen Bee seems distressed, and unlike Very Naughty or Master Neki, doesn't appear to be there by choice. Then it clicks. The swarm of bees in Forest Frenzy, the increased critter presence. What if, as they passed through the Zingers' home, they were chased off by the swarm, and Queen Bee even managed to chase them all the way to the island? Or maybe Queen Bee was captured and left there, which would explain why the swarm was out in force back in Forest Frenzy. Either way, Queen Bee isn't working for the Kremlings. She's got her own priorities and motivations or whatever, and it's just bad luck that she and the Kongs have to come to blows. And to me, that serves as the perfect capper to the theme of this world, a world that explores all the inhabitants caught in the middle of the conflict. If we were to expand upon it a little bit more, you could make the argument that Vine Valley is where the Kongs learned that they have a responsibility to protect the island from the Kremlings, not just get their bananas back. Like it or not, they're the only ones with the power to save DK Island from the fate that awaits it if the Kremlings get a hold of it. Alright, that's part 45 done. Don't really have much else to say about it. I really dig the theme of Vine Valley, and think it adds a lot to the game as a whole. When I was younger, it was kind of a slog to get through at times, but I have a newfound appreciation for it these days. I'd be keen to know how you feel about it though. How do you think it stacks up to Congo Jungle and Monkey Mines? Do you think I'm on the money with the theme, or am I way off base? If you've got something to say, let's duke it out in the comments. Until next time.